joining me today. Today we're going to talk about a very heavy topic, and that topic is self-harm. Now, the reason you should be aware of self-harm is because it happens to so many young people. And I mean, it's not exclusive to young people, but so many young people, even in our churches, our schools, our community, they're hurting, and this is what they use to cope with their pain and the struggles of life. I've been doing some research, and I want to share with you guys some conclusions that I've come to and some research that I found that will help you understand more about self-harm and help you to inspire you to take action when it comes to self-harm. Self-harming is destructive emotionally and physically, and as Christians, we need to take an active role in preventing it. See, prevention is the best medicine. So I'm going to explain what it is, where it comes from, and also how we can help hurting youth, and I will show you how we can prevent it. So let's get started. Self-harm is nothing new. Let's see, Sandra L. Gilman, who wrote an article about the history of self-harm, said that one of the first written accounts of self-harm was from the 5th century BC. A Spartan leader, it was documented that he would cut himself, I don't know the context of the situation, but that was like one of the first accounts of self-harm. So even the Bible talks about self-harming. In 1 Kings 18, talked about how, I think it was Elisha, in the situation where they built altars to false gods. The Israelites, they were calling on Baal to send fire to burn the altar, and they would cut themselves, and they were cutting themselves, and they did this for so long, but we all know what happens. The one true God proved himself. But they did it as an act of worship. And also in Leviticus it talks about how the Israelites, it says, do not cut yourselves for the dead, or mark yourselves. So that's a little history about self-harm. It's nothing new, and it was interesting because I talked to one of my coworkers about my topic, and I explained to her some, it's not a new thing. And she's a little bit older than I am, so she's like, wow, I thought it was a new thing, but it's not. And I'd also like to mention that Dr. Gradanis, he talked about self-harm, or he wrote about it in one of his articles, and he said it's not limited to cutting. I think that's a common misconception. I didn't know this, but cutting, it's not the only method of self-harm. He talked about poisoning, jumping off high places, poisoning, biting oneself, tons of other things. Self-battery, that means you hit yourself or you hit walls. So it's not limited to cutting, and I think that's really important, because you would say, oh, this person, you see them, they have cuts. It's a very common method. It's very common, but it's not limited to cutting. So it's really important to understand that. So as you can see, it's an old problem, and it's not limited to cutting. So what are we supposed to do with this information? I mean, it's really dark, and it's like, where's the hope in that? As Christians, we need to be aware of the problem. So today's generation is very different from past generations. We have this thing called the internet, right? And oh my goodness, it's grown to this massive community, and young people use it all the time. I've had a cell phone since like 4th grade, and I've been on the internet probably from before that time. So young people have access to websites that will promote self-harm, or they have access to resources that will help them seek help to prevent it, right? And I mean, I never realized that there were resources saying, cut yourself, or resources that promote suicide. You have to be really careful what you allow your children to get onto on the internet, because it feeds into their mind and their heart. So Jo Bell, she wrote an article about how the internet affects self-harming children or people considering it or suicide. And she said, yeah, you have access to things that promote it or things that can help prevent it. She said that we need to eventually get to a point where the internet promotes prevention. And I agree with that, but it doesn't really give us a reason or a way to prevent it in the first place. And I think we should discuss how we can prevent it in the first place. So, as Christians, we need to look at the world around us. We need to be aware of the people that we influence. There's hurting people all around us. I think as church people, we have a tendency to pretend that it's all okay. Oh, how are you today? Oh, great. We have that tendency to, put on this fake smile, and I'm guilty of it, I'm guilty of it. But we need to be aware that even though people, look okay, we need to be aware that, life happens to everybody. Nobody's immune from, the struggles of life. And, growing up, if I would get hurt or somebody would hurt my feelings, I had somebody tell me, get up and stop crying. That's a tough thing to hear, especially with children. As a child, I was like, whoa, that kind of stinks. And growing up and doing this research, I'm like, that didn't really teach me a good coping skill. And Dr. Guerrero and other researchers have concluded that self-harm is a coping mechanism. So that's where prevention comes in, is the best medicine. We need to teach our children and our friends to cope with the struggles of life in a healthy way. We can't expect them to grow up and know how to deal with things and just have peace about it, because they're children. They don't know. That's our jobs as adults, as parents, as teachers, as older friends. We have that responsibility to teach younger people how to deal with the struggles of life in a healthy way, in a less destructive way. So we've talked about the history of self-harm. We've talked about different methods, and we've talked about some preventative measures. So what do we do with this? When you see someone hurting, I challenge you to reach out to them. Be the person that they can talk to. If you have kids, I strongly suggest that you keep open communication with them. Help them to understand that, yes, things happen, and yes, the pain that we feel is relevant and it's real, but it doesn't have to be the end of us. And there's reason to keep living. And people have different reasons for living, but as Christians, I think our main purpose in life is to glorify God and experience His love for us. But that's a different topic. But Galatians 6:2 tells us to share in each other's burdens and fulfill the law of Christ. So when you share your burdens, I think that means we care for them. And I think the law of Christ in this context is, love your neighbor as yourself. If you love somebody, you're going to be there for them. And yeah, we all have limitations. We're only human. We can't be in 6 places at once. But I think it's important that we show love for people by being there. So I know it's a heavy topic, and but I think as adults we need to be aware of what's going on with the youth. And I think we also need to think of ways how we can reach those around us. Self-harm is a serious issue affecting literally millions of young people. And it's not just limited to young people, but affects so many different people. So I appreciate you all listening to my speech, and thank you so much.